JMU's bowl eligibility. It's Locked On Sunbelt.
You are Locked On Sunbelt, your daily podcast on the Sunbelt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I'm your host, Dave Schultz. Special guest tonight, JMU beat writer for the Daily News Record, Shane Metlin. We'll get to that here in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so let's talk some JMU. They're hosting ODU tonight, and we do a deep dive with the beat writer Shane Metlin on their eligibility, their 2 years, the waiver, and we get into all of that. We also talk about, Jordan McCloud wasn't even the starting quarterback when the season started. How did Curt Cignetti make that kind of mistake? Although it didn't really cost him, and Jordan McCloud was put in pretty quickly. We talk about what happens if JMU has one of those special seasons, which they're on their way to doing, can go 12-0. Does Curt Cignetti stick around? What would take him away? And then we do a quick basketball question as well, as JMU was your preseason Sunbelt pick to win the conference. All right, let's get to it. Let's bring him in. He is the beat writer for the Daily News Record. He is Shane Metlin. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Thrilled to have our next guest on. He is Shane Metlin from the Daily News and Record, covering James Madison. Duke's hosting Old Dominion, and lots to talk about with James Madison. Let's start from the beginning of the season, because Jordan McCloud, one of the better quarterbacks in all of the Sunbelt, was not the starting quarterback coming out of camp. What happened? And it's an odd question. How did Curt Cignetti get that so wrong, although he did make a quick change?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alonzo Barnett was really good in camp. And I think part of it is, Jordan McCloud's been getting better and better every week. He went almost 2 years without playing. And, maybe just wasn't ready for games. I think maybe he struggled in scrimmages a little bit once everything just got going full speed. And he said it here recently that, he's really just now starting to get used to not only the game moving faster than it does in practice, but also having 11 guys on the other side who actually want to hit him. I mean, he didn't take any hits until that second half of the season opener. So, I think it was a combination of Barnett practiced really well. I think his confidence was probably shaken a little bit after that first game, but I think he practiced really well, and McCloud it's been a progress for McCloud to get to this point.
That's not unusual. Joe Burrow said the same thing. When he got better his second year, he's like, guys, I haven't played football for 3 years, right? I went from high school and sat on the bench for 3 years until I got here. So it's been a little bit. So it takes 8 to 10 games. This isn't baseball where you're playing every day, or at least 5 days a week or something like that. You get one chance, and if it doesn't go well, you got to wait another week.
Yeah, and I think quarterback probably as much as any position is that's true of, because they protect those guys in practice. They're not
right.
They're not like running around worried about getting hit in practice. They're throwing the ball and they're learning the playbook, but it's a completely different thing to be out there on the field against another team without a different colored jersey on.
We're talking to Shane Metlin from the Daily News and Record. All right, let's talk about the team on the field. It seems like James Madison has gotten better, because if you go back early on, they have some very close wins, some wins and moves on. Even Virginia was a come-from-ahead victory where they were way ahead, fell way behind, and ended up Jordan McCloud leading them to a comeback victory. They were way ahead of Utah State. They won that ball game late. It seems maybe like their two better ball games so far, their two biggest wins, maybe their two latest wins against, Georgia Southern was a blowout win. And then they kind of did what they had to do against Marshall. It appeared that Curt Cignetti was like, well, they can't move the ball, so I don't have to go for it on 4th and 2 at the 40. I can punt it away because they can't move it, and eventually we'll get enough. And they did.
Yeah, and I think the Marshall and Troy games both were sort of like that. You look at JMU not putting up a ton of points, but they were extra conservative in those games because they trusted the defense. Those early season games that were close, they still showed like they would play for a quarter or two looking like a team that could win 10, 11 games. And,
right.
You would see the flashes of it, but then they'd have a third quarter where the offense just didn't move the ball at all. And, whatever the reasons were for that, I think they were figuring out something. I think they're still figuring out McCloud, like we talked about, just exactly the best ways to use him, and him kind of like getting used to what the staff expects from him. And I think we saw some third quarters in some games where they just weren't clicking offensively, but did enough to get victories. And now we're seeing something closer to complete game from them.
We certainly are. So one of those games would be against South Alabama, where things were not clicking for them, but they had 3 explosive plays plus a pick 6. Kane Womack, after the ball game from South Alabama, is like, well, we played pretty well except for these 3 plays where they all scored touchdowns against them. What happened there? Because it was South Alabama was just out of sorts that day, right? They got caught in traffic. They showed up an hour late. TV is showing, the linebackers coach as the head coach. It was 14-0 before everyone got comfortable. And yet, it felt like until the pick 6 that game was up for grabs. And in fact, South Alabama had a chance to get back into that ball game until the pick 6.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you said, South Alabama, it was a rough start for them. They had travel problems, I think, from the moment they left Mobile, or even before that, from what I heard, like the charter plane didn't arrive on time to pick them up. And then, a lot of teams, especially in towns the size of, Harrisonburg or Boone or Statesboro, teams aren't staying right in town. So they've got an hour bus ride to get there, and there's traffic going over the mountains. And it just, they didn't have time to really go through the whole preparation they normally would for game time. And JMU got off to a fast start. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily the reason JMU won, but surely probably played a role in, you look at what South Alabama's done since. They're just crushing people. And, is JMU that much better than South Alabama? It's hard to say, but like you said, explosion plays, defense got a score. It was just one of those days where, things got out of hand for a team, and it happens to almost everybody.
Well, I'm trying to figure that out because there was a week. It was a week that South Alabama played Oklahoma State. And then, LSU looked good that weekend. And the Cajuns looked good that weekend. And maybe Syracuse Orange looked good that weekend. And I wasn't sure if it was, all these teams looked really good or the other teams were kind of bad. And I think we're kind of going back to the other teams were kind of bad because, I don't know about South Alabama right now. They've beaten up on Southern Miss and ULM. And so I'm not exactly sure how good they are. I guess we'll find out this week against the Cajuns. The Cajuns all of a sudden are having times struggling. So I'm a big win and move on guy. I know there are rankings in college football, but LSU is going to rue the day they did not beat Ole Miss, or else they'd still be in the race for this college football playoff. So, despite having, almost a handful of 1-score victories, JMU gets the job done week in and week out.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about too, it's so much different for football than we'll talk about some about basketball, later in the year, probably, where teams can have 2-week stretch where they just are absolutely terrible and it might not even matter. But, in football, a non-conference loss to Central Michigan isn't that big of a deal for South Alabama, but it does make you wonder, like, why are they losing that game when they can play so well against an Oklahoma State, or, just really, really take it to some, I don't think ULM is a bad team. There's talent there. I mean, they're not winning close games, but, South Alabama's the only one who's really pounded them like that.
ULM's had a punch gut of a few ball games, having a goal line stand against App State, and then seeing them kick a 54-yard field goal, and then up 20-9 to Texas State and losing that ball game. It's been a tough season for ULM. They actually got off to a 2-0 start for the first time since like 18, and it's gone in the other direction since they get Arkansas State this week. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's take a time out. When we come back, we'll talk about what Shane Metlin has found out looking into JMU's bowl eligibility. He doesn't think it's quite set in stone just yet. But let's talk about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. How does it work? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go more or less than the PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. At PrizePicks, you aren't competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. PrizePicks entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. PrizePicks offers a recently improved deposit and withdrawal experience, including the option to use Apple Pay for quick deposits into your account. Head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Also brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain they have the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Let's get back to it with the JMU beat writer for the Daily News Record. He is Shane Metlin. We talk about JMU's bowl eligibility moving forward this year. All right, we're talking with Shane Metlin from the Daily News Record. Let's talk about what the focus is with what's been going on with James Madison. All right, they are ranked 25th in the nation because the rest of these teams are basically going to be playing each other. They very well could find themselves in the top 10 should they stay undefeated. It's not like you're going after and finding, pushing that James Madison should be in the bowl game. You're finding out why and what is the response from, I guess, different elements. Who have you been in touch with and who's actually in charge if they go to a bowl game? Is it the NCAA? Because the NCAA is not in charge of anything when it comes to postseason football.
Well, the transition rules for the postseason are NCAA rules. So they're the ones who are determining that, it's still a second year transition for JMU. They denied the waiver. The original, I think, idea for JMU was we join the Sun Belt as a full member in the first year transition. Transition teams normally don't do that. Like in the past, you've seen a transition team in that first year, they may play 7 FCS teams and 3 or 4 FBS teams. They don't play a full league schedule. The Sun Belt wanted to get to 14 right away, especially after those former Conference USA schools sued to get out of Conference USA. Everybody was like, we want to start playing our 14-team league right now. So JMU made the move up completely in the first year. That was kind of the basis of the asking for the waiver, which they thought they might get, especially before the NCAA changed presidents. They didn't get that waiver, so now they are in year 2 of transition. But the difference is they're playing their second year of a full FBS schedule. So it's still considered second year transition, which means that they're not eligible for a bowl unless there's not enough teams to fill all 41. I think it's 41 bowl games. If there's not enough teams that are 6-6, or 7-6, if they have 2 FCS wins to fill it, then JMU and I guess Jacksonville State too is in this mix too. But
sure,
I believe JMU would probably get picked ahead of Jacksonville State if things continue the way they're going. But JMU would be at the top of the list ahead of a 5-7 team. Like Rice made it to a bowl game at 5-7 last year because there weren't enough teams and they had the highest APR. So JMU would be ahead of Rice in that situation this year. So there's still a possibility JMU could play in a bowl game, and that's an NCAA thing. What then I asked about the college football playoff, I asked their committee, so how are you going to handle JMU, or will you rank them if they do become bowl eligible later in the season, because by like week 11, 12, the championship week, we could know that JMU is suddenly bowl eligible for the last college football playoff rankings. And if they were 12-0, there's a decent chance they would be the best group of 5 team.
Sure.
So what do you do with them then? And the college football playoff said they're not going to consider James Madison, even if they do have that back door into a bowl game. So that's where everything stands right now.
All right, we're talking with Shane Metlin, Daily News and Record, talking JMU. Would they just go to any bowl game? Because it's one thing, when you're 8-4 and you're kind of locked into whatever bowl game they want to offer to you. But when you're 12-0 and you're not going to one of the top bowl games, just going to the, whatever bowl, outside of what would have been nice, but it's canceled this year. They're not playing the Bahamas Bowl in the Bahamas. That may be worth it. But they're just going to go to any bowl just to go to a bowl game. If some 5-17 can't make it, that seems disappointing. If you ask me, how does JMU feel about that?
I think so. I mean, it would be the first bowl game in school history. So I think there would be some excitement about that. They've had postseason runs at FCS. And, I think if they end up at the Frisco Bowl, where they've played the FCS championship game umpteen times, like it might be they might be wondering, well, we left FCS to go to Frisco again. Like, I don't know, like something like that. But I think there'll be a little bit of excitement just to play in a bowl game. But honestly, I don't think there would be, if we were just talking about, the Myrtle Beach Bowl or whatever, not to, knock the Myrtle Beach Bowl, but if that
I didn't say that. I was very general. I knew that was
just the first one that came to my head. That's not a New Year's Six Bowl that has some ties to the Sun Belt, and it's not a knock on that. But I think if we were just talking about the only shot was a regular bowl, there probably wouldn't be so much outcry. I think if you're someone within the JMU program or even their administration, the possibility of winning a conference championship would outweigh going to a minor bowl game, and certainly going to the Fiesta Bowl potentially would outweigh like any other bowl game.
Yes.
But, and I mean, I should probably also clarify here. There's been so much outcry, obviously from fans. And then lately it's been from Virginia politicians. From JMU's administration, their waiver was denied in May. They haven't pushed forth any other requests since then. JMU's administration was going to go on with what was decided. They weren't happy about it, but that was the end of it there for them.
Right.
It's then once they get to the point where they're 7-0 and ranked, now everybody's like, hey, wait a second. They probably didn't even see the story back in May when they had a waiver denied. That's one thing that's become very clear to me from talking to politicians who are kind of pushing this, is that they don't understand a lot about college sports.
Sure.
And they're trying to put their opinions out there. Even if you think they're right, it's kind of you kind of shake your head when you start asking them questions. Like, for example, I asked the staff of a state senator who's really pushing this, okay, you're talking all about the NCAA, but what about the college football playoff? And they had no idea that was a separate thing from the NCAA.
Right.
And 2, they're like, well, they only pick the top 4 teams, so it doesn't really apply to Jamie. I was like, no, they pick who goes. They pick which group of 5 team goes to the Fiesta Bowl. That would be a huge thing for JMU. And so then, the staff of the senator who's really talking a lot about it is like behind the scenes as I'm kind of filling them in on what's going on. Like, now they have to research what they're talking about. And it's kind of crazy, like to see the back end of how these things happen in politics. It's almost a little scary to think about stuff that actually does matter.
Well, I think an attorney general in North Carolina got into the Tez Walker mess, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, he's eligible. So is the attorney general for Virginia thinking about suing who he can potentially sue?
I don't know. And then, I don't know if it'll be a lawsuit, but the one thing I've seen, the attorney general in North Carolina just basically said, maybe we should look into antitrust violations
right
here. And that did it real quick. That's been tossed out by, a state senator in Virginia. They've also, talked about how Virginia has been a pretty friendly state to the NCAA as far as NIL goes, as far as gambling restrictions. Right now, you can't bet on a JMU game or a Virginia Tech game in the state of Virginia. You can bet on other stuff, but you can't bet on Virginia college teams. That was something that the Virginia legislature kind of worked out with the NCAA before allowing gambling. There's been other things, whether or not NCAA athletes are ever considered employees. There are things that I think they can threaten the NCAA with that may move the needle. I don't know. We'll see. But it's interesting. This is not something I ever anticipated covering. And, that's because nobody anticipated having a second year transition team be in this position, and none of the rules and none of the organizations really know what to do with it.
Yeah, we're talking with Shane Metlin from the Daily News and Record. So is the ball rolling? Do we think the ball is rolling? Like you said, JMU isn't doing anything, but other people are picking up and running with it. And we're going to get, last week where the Marshall ball game, I think Matt Barry and Roddy Jones, talked about it for a little bit. I'm sure, this week with ODU, I think that's on ESPNU. It's going to be 3.5 hours of why JMU is not eligible to go to a major bowl. Yeah.
And, JMU plays the next week on national TV again against, a Georgia State team that there might be a lot of eyeballs on that game if they both win. So it's definitely been a talking point for ESPN. And 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have thought there was any chance that it changes. Now, and even when it was just the Attorney General in Virginia, I didn't think there was too much of it, but now it's become a bipartisan issue. It's the only thing that the Republicans and Democrats in Virginia agree on. And it's, I don't know. I mean, at this point, nothing would really shock me either way.
Right. We know that Democrats and Republicans can't, agree what day of the week it is. And yet somehow the United States Supreme Court unanimously came down against the NCAA.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take one more time out. When we come back, we talk about the possibility of Curt Cignetti moving on if a big time job comes along. And what about the projections for the JMU basketball team? It's time to tell you about FanDuel. There we go. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Let's wrap things up with the James Madison Dukes beat writer with the Daily News Record. He is Shane Metlin. We talk about, does Curt Cignetti decide to move on after having one of these special seasons? And what about the Dukes basketball team? We're talking with Shane Metlin from the Daily News and Record. All right, so one of the byproducts of having a season like JMU is having, and, God forbid they do go undefeated, finish the season 12-0, obviously Curt Cignetti is going to get a lot of chit-chat on if he's sticking around or, does he see this thing through, try and win a Sunbelt championship, try to go to a major bowl game. What are the factors? And we don't really know outside of Michigan State right now what jobs are going to be open moving forward. Virginia just changed their coach. That's probably not going to open up. Tech, he just got there. Obviously, there's ties to Pittsburgh. What do we think what Curt Cignetti may be thinking following the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be kind of a wait and see thing. Obviously, I think he'll be kind of a hot name, but he's 62 years old. He doesn't look like
a little bit older.
But yeah. I mean, I think that not only plays a role in who might look at him, but I think it also plays a role in is he going to want to spend 5 years trying to rebuild someplace as opposed to, the money, JMU pays, not that much for a Sunbelt team at this point. And I think that's partially because Curt hasn't, been demanding a huge raise. I think everybody says their coach is different. And, sometimes that's somewhat true. Sometimes it's not. But I think money is not a driving factor for Cignetti, but at the same time, you know, if somebody offers to, you know, pay you 5 times what you're making, like that's obviously going to raise some eyebrows. And, you know, he's probably got one chance to make that jump up at his age. And I think if he does, it'll be what he deems like pretty much a perfect situation where he can go in, win right away. I mean, one thing that you talk about, like if he's a different kind of guy, and I think to some degree he is.
Well, he is a different kind of
guy. His father is a Hall of Famer, a college football Hall of Famer who did it mostly by doing it at the D2 level. He reveres his late father who died last year. I think part of him probably would love to, you know, make that really big impression at James Madison and get into the College Football Hall of Fame, which maybe doesn't happen if you have to go through 2 or 3 losing seasons somewhere for money. And, you know, I don't know if that'll play a huge factor, but I think maybe that would matter more to him than some people.
So a couple of things with that, right? If you are, if he is looking to move on, he's not moving on again, right?
Yeah.
The next stop is the last stop, right? So that's one of those things, right? You don't have to, all of a sudden he, you know, gets has a good couple of years. You don't have to give him one of those ridiculous Gus Malzahn contracts because he's not moving on again. Or if he stays at JMU, you know, it's, you know, how much does it cost to live in Harrisonburg, right? He doesn't have to, you know, I don't know, but you know, he's going to get a raise there eventually. He's going to get on the same par as the, you know, John Summeralls and the Kane Womicks and the Charles Huffs, right? He's going to be making a pretty good living. And these guys work all day anyways. They don't have any time to spend their money. They go on like a week vacation in the middle of June and that's it.
Yeah, and his kids are grown and they're successful in their own right. You know, his at least one daughter is like finishing med school and is going to have her own money. And you know, it's a, you know, money is very nice, but it's not. Everybody's going to say their coach, you know, is different and wants to stay and everything, but I think there's a little something to it at JMU, like just the potential. If he did get JMU into like the expanded 12-team playoff in the next couple of years,
right?
Like, he's a Hall of Famer if he does that with his overall record, what he's done at the FCS level, and then doing that. Like, I mean, he's going to the College Football Hall of Fame and joining his father there, and I think something like that would be pretty intriguing to him, maybe more than $2 million a year. I mean, especially if he can get to the $1 million range in the Sun Belt.
Right. I mean, that is not, as ridiculous as that sounds, it's not all that ridiculous, because if this is happening next year and we're sitting here and he's 25th heading into week 8, they could very well be in the top 12 come the end of the season when it's Sun Belt Championship. And again, everybody else is playing everybody else, whereas that's not the case with the Sun Belt.
We're getting to a point in the next couple of years, there's going to be a group of 5 team in the college football playoff. And, you know, at this point, why not the Sun Belt champ? And why couldn't the Sun Belt champ be James Madison? You know?
All right, let's wrap things up with Shane Metlin from the Daily News Record. I got to ask you, JMU picked to win the Sun Belt. This is done by the coaches. What are your thoughts on that? And I think they lost, if memory serves, they had a tough loss against South Alabama. They could not stop Isaiah Moore, who was making shots with his eyes closed last year in the Sun Belt tournament.
Yeah, South Alabama was just hot in the Sun Belt tournament. They damn near won the whole thing.
They did.
What were they? The 8 seed, something like that. Like
something like that.
Yeah, they were hot, and JMU ran into a hot team. Like it should be a good JMU squad. I think they did pretty well in the transfer portal. TJ Bickerstaff gives them a big guy that I think is probably as skilled of actual post players they've had in a while. So I think him combined with Terrence Edwards coming back was the 6th man of the year last year in the conference. That's 2 potential, I think, all conference type players at JMU. But I think it might also be like a little bit slower start for them than they've typically come out here under Mark Byington and just, you know, started fast, beat some teams early in the season. Like either a couple of years ago, you know, they beat a good Virginia team early in the season,
right?
Or last year they weren't playing a very good schedule, but they were just really hammering teams early on. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the record into mid-December is not as good as it has been in past years, but I think it's a team that has the potential to maybe be peaking come February, which is what you want.
All right. One more question. We might as well talk about it. What do you think about the game against ODU? ODU, a little bit surprising, right? Kind of picked at the bottom of the Sun Belt East. They're actually 3-1. I presume everybody else in the East is rooting for ODU because, now they wouldn't have to hear about JMU at the top of the division and can't go to the Sun Belt Championship. It's like a 22-point spread. That seems large. What do you think about this ballgame?
That spread does seem large considering JMU hasn't won too many games, but by that margin, even
ODU hasn't lost that games like that. So
yeah, it seems large. There are some matchup things that when you look at it, what JMU does really well, they're getting to the quarterback. They've lead the country in sacks. Jalen Green's got 13 sacks on his own, and ODU's playing two guys at quarterback off and on this year. Neither one of them's the most mobile guy in the world. They've given up. I think they might be worse than the nation giving up sacks. I think.
Yeah.
So that seems to kind of play in JMU's favor. But to me, I think if somebody's going to beat JMU, it's going to be a game where they get, a special teams touchdown or, a defensive score or just, turnovers get out of control for JMU. And ODU has been one of the teams in the Sun Belt that's really taken advantage of those things. They almost beat Wake Forest, and that was a lot of those kinds of plays. So I think if we're just talking a normal game where there's not a lot of fireworks in terms of fumbles, interceptions, things like that, I think JMU probably wins it fairly comfortably. But I think ODU is also the kind of team who might be able to create some of those fireworks against JMU.
Yeah, they're pretty good with the explosive plays. They had a bunch of explosive plays against the Cajuns and against Marshall. So they can do it. He's Shane Metlin from the Daily News Record. Really appreciate your time, Shane. Thanks for filling us in on JMU. Always appreciate you hopping on Locked On Sunbelt, and enjoy the football. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, Steve.